it's Jonah, and not as the Sunday school story, but Jonah as the book itself. And it's partly because it's the most amazingly well-written book. Of course, you have to read it in Hebrew to get that. But it is also, I guess, a satire. And I really enjoy the humour that's in that story. But it's the story I go back to. You know, when I'm having an argument with God about something, which we all do, and I'm resisting, and I think about Jonah sitting there, you know, being angry with God and very disturbed by what God had asked him to do, I go to that space and I think, well, I can have this argument with God because he's incredibly patient. And so I can have that discussion with God and be assured that it's okay to do that, because Jonah, he didn't, you know, wipe Jonah out when Jonah argued with him. So, so that's why I like Jonah. It's good.
My favourite stories in the Old Testament, I was trying to think through this question, and I was thinking at first about Genesis 1. I love Genesis 1. I love its kind of its massive opening. It's kind of like an anthem, and I've seen it used in church services since childhood. But then I thought I wasn't being truly honest to myself. As a story, the story that really grabs me is the story of David and Saul, and I've always been fascinated by that. David being the hero, but he behaves so appallingly. Saul being the anti-hero, but actually I understand and get him a lot of the time. I find that interplay fascinating.
Again, there are lots of favourite parts of the Old Testament. I'm fascinated by the creation stories in the opening pages of Genesis and the amount that's packed into those stories. The authors have taken a lot of the creation stories that were in the cultures around them at the time, written their own creation story which kind of corrects those stories in the surrounding cultures. So there's a great deal in there. People sometimes wonder how God could have created light before he created the sun. And that's correcting a sun-worshipping culture that was in the ancient Near East at the time. So just little kind of passing peculiarities like that have a lot of theology and meaning built into them when you start digging them out. So I love the creation stories. I love the Exodus story, where the people of God really wrestle with a liberating God, a God who wants to free slaves, and the historical struggle that's involved with that as well. But I think probably one of my real favourites in the Old Testament is the Joseph saga, which comes, you know, the final 12 or 15 chapters of the book of Genesis, where Joseph's brothers are jealous of him and they sell him into slavery to get rid of this pest. A famine strikes the land. Joseph ends up in Egypt as a slave and works his way up through various means to be the head of the Pharaoh's household. He comes up with a plan to rescue the Egyptians in the middle of a famine, and then Joseph's brothers and his father end up coming to Egypt to get food. They don't recognise Joseph. So in the end it all comes together and the family is reunited, but Joseph's brothers are worried that he will hold a grudge against them. And the story finishes with a marvellous phrase which is kind of one of the main themes of Scripture. Joseph says to his brothers, "What you did to me, you meant for evil, for harm, but God meant it for good." And there's this idea that no matter what human beings do, no matter how nasty and destructive they become, God can work in all those circumstances to bring about good. And that's a major theme in the Scriptures. So that's a favourite story.
We'll get there still.